The first red flag was the note duct taped to my mailbox. In all caps, written in faded pink ink probably from a glitter pen, it said, "Welcome to the community. Please drop off your HOA dues at Valerie's house, 3rd on the left before Friday. $400. Cash only." I stared at it for a second, then laughed. Hard. Because here's the thing, I just bought a foreclosed, run-down farmhouse on 10 acres of land. It was 3 miles outside the nearest subdivision, surrounded by woods and barbed wire fencing older than I was. There wasn't a single paved sidewalk in sight. I'm Russell Zane, 43, ex-electrician, and recently lucky enough to snag a weirdly affordable foreclosure at a county estate auction. I poured most of my savings into buying the property outright. It needed work, sure, but it was mine. No mortgage. No neighbors screaming at each other through paper-thin walls. And definitely no HOA, or so I thought. The day after I moved in, I was dragging a busted lawnmower out of my truck bed when a white Lexus SUV rolled up my gravel drive like it owned the road. The driver's side window rolled down, and there she was. Blonde bob, giant sunglasses, clipboard, and a permanent scowl like someone had just insulted her pet poodle. "Excuse me," she called out like I was already in trouble. "Are you the new owner?" "Yeah." "Russell," I said, wiping my hands on my jeans. "You need something?" "I'm Valerie," she announced like that meant something to me. "I'm president of the Briar Hills HOA. You're late on your dues." I blinked. "The what?" She stepped out of the SUV in a pair of spotless white wedges and looked around like she'd just stepped into a landfill. "Your property technically borders the Briar Hills community, so by annexation standards, you fall under our jurisdiction. We've been sending notices ever since the bank took over." "Annexation?" I raised an eyebrow. "Lady, I live in a 1940s farmhouse half a mile from your subdivision. There's a creek and a damn cow field between me and your precious cul-de-sac. You don't own this land." "This is a legal formality, Mr. Zane," she said, already scribbling something on her clipboard. "You're part of the HOA now. That includes quarterly dues, architectural reviews, and code enforcement." I laughed again. "That's cute. But no. This land's never been part of any HOA. I checked the county records before I bought it." She paused for a beat. "The records haven't been updated since the annexation petition was filed. We're still waiting on confirmation." "Then come back when you've got confirmation," I said. "Until then, take your clipboard and go bother someone who actually signed up for this nonsense." Her face twitched, but she didn't argue. Just turned, got back in her Lexus, and drove off with a squeal of tires and a cloud of dust. I figured that was the end of it. I was wrong. Over the next week, I got 3 more friendly reminders nailed to my fence post. Then came the fake fines, one for unapproved exterior paint. My garage was just old wood. Another for unacceptable lawn length. It was 6 inches max. And one for unauthorized livestock, even though the only animal on my land was a stray cat that refused to leave. That's when I got suspicious. I drove down to the county recorder's office and asked to pull the annexation paperwork Valerie had mentioned. There was nothing. No petition, no legal filings, no map expansions. Nothing. Briar Hills HOA had never owned, annexed, or even legally touched my land. They were bluffing, and I had just decided I wasn't going to let it slide. The next morning, I was halfway through tearing out the busted porch steps when a tow truck rolled up and stopped at the edge of my gravel drive. The driver didn't get out. Just sat there with the engine idling, looking at my truck like it owed him money. I dropped my hammer and walked over. "You lost?" I asked. He leaned out the window, holding up a clipboard. "Got an order to tow a gray F-150 for delinquent HOA fees. Says here it's unauthorized to be parked on HOA property." I gestured to the dirt road behind him. "You see any HOA signs? This is private land. You're about a mile outside your jurisdiction." He squinted at his paper. "Address says Lot 74, Briar Hills." "Yeah, that's not me," I said. "You're looking at County Parcel 32, different boundary, different zoning, different everything." He looked uncomfortable, like he knew something was off. They said it was part of a new annexation. Then they lied, I said flatly. And you try to take my truck, I'll have you charged with attempted theft. That did it. He muttered something under his breath, threw the clipboard on the dash, and reversed out the drive without another word. I didn't go back to the porch. Instead, I headed straight for the county zoning office. The clerk, a wiry guy with a voice like gravel and a badge that said Todd, pulled up my parcel file and spun the monitor so I could see. Your boundary's been unchanged since 1978, he said. No petitions, no overlays, no conditional use permits. You're not zoned for residential HOA management. Then how the hell are they telling tow companies I'm on their land? He clicked a few more times, then frowned. That isn't in our records, but if someone forged a plat map and submitted it to a vendor, it wouldn't go through here. That'd be civil fraud. Who would I report that to? Start with the sheriff, Todd said, and bring copies of everything. I did exactly that. By sundown, I had a folder an inch thick property line maps, ownership history, tax documents, and a notarized statement from the county itself confirming that Briar Hills had no legal claim to my land. The deputy I spoke to, a tired-looking woman named Reyes, flipped through my folder with rising eyebrows. They've been issuing fines, she asked, and trying to tow my truck. She leaned back in her chair. That's not just harassment, that's impersonating a legal authority. If they're using falsified documents to justify it, they're in felony territory. I raised an eyebrow. So what happens now? We'll open a case, she said. But if they're smart, they'll back off the second they hear we're digging. They didn't. 2 days later, I came home from picking up lumber to find a bright red sticker slapped across my front door. Condemned unsafe structure vacate immediately. There was no signature, no date, no seal from the county or city. Just another glitter pen note taped below it. Per HOA Code 18.9, all dwellings in severe disrepair are subject to code enforcement. Non-compliance will result in municipal penalties. I didn't even bother pulling it down. I drove straight to the building inspector's office. The actual inspector, a stocky guy named Harris, looked at me like I'd walked in speaking another language when I showed him the sticker. We don't use those, he said. Our condemnations are printed, signed, and registered through the county clerk. So this was fake, he nodded, and illegal. Only the city or county can condemn a structure, not an HOA, and definitely not with a glitter pen. That night, I installed 2 trail cams on the trees facing my driveway and one on the porch roof aimed at the front door. I hid them well, tucked behind branches and old shutters, and then I waited. Sure enough, the next evening, a white Lexus pulled up just after dusk. Valerie got out, holding more of those red stickers and a roll of tape. She looked around, then approached my front door. I watched her from the shadows of the barn. She peeled off the previous sticker, replaced it with a new one, and added another note underneath. Final warning, fines escalating. I recorded everything. Every step, every sticker, every second she spent on my property without permission. The next morning, I brought the footage to Deputy Reyes. She watched the video in silence, then let out a low whistle. You weren't kidding. Can you arrest her? Not yet, she said. But this is enough for a warrant. By the end of the week, the sheriff's department had executed a search warrant on the Briar Hills HOA office, which turned out to be a converted pool house behind Valerie's home. Inside, they found files filled with doctored maps, fake fine notices printed to look official, and a spreadsheet tracking revenue from over a dozen properties that, like mine, weren't actually in the HOA. Turns out, I wasn't the only one. A retired couple who lived near the old mill had paid over $2,000 in fines after being threatened with legal action. A disabled vet down the road had been told he'd lose his VA assistance if he didn't comply with HOA mandates. All lies, all backed by forged documents. The county prosecutor opened a case within days. Valerie was arrested for fraud, impersonation of a public official, and attempted extortion. Her bail was set high enough that she didn't walk out. The rest of the HOA board scattered. 2 resigned outright. One lawyered up and tried to claim he didn't know what Valerie was doing. No one believed him, especially not after the emails surfaced. The best part? The county ruled that any funds collected through fraudulent means had to be refunded in full plus damages. The HOA's bank account was frozen, and their legal counsel withdrew representation the moment the criminal charges hit. As for me, I got a formal apology from the sheriff's office and a letter from the county commissioner thanking me for bringing this matter into the light. But the real victory came later. I hosted a bonfire the following month. Everyone who'd been targeted, farmers, vets, retirees, showed up. We burned every fake fine, sticker, and letter we'd kept. Someone brought marshmallows, someone else brought a guitar, and as the fire crackled and the stars came out, we made a promise. No more getting steamrolled by people with clipboards and a god complex. Not out here. Not again. Because when you mess with folks who know how to wire a barn, fix a fence, and call a bluff, you'd better be ready for the whole house of cards to come down. 2 weeks after the bonfire, I was on my roof repairing a cracked vent pipe when a county vehicle pulled up beside my barn. A tall man in a brown blazer stepped out, holding a leather portfolio and scanning the property like he was trying to memorize every square inch. He didn't look like law enforcement, more like someone who'd spent the last 10 years in a courtroom or a government building. I climbed down the ladder, wiping my hands on a rag as he approached. "You Russell Zane?" he asked. "Depends. You bringing more glitter stickers or something official?" He didn't laugh, just pulled a badge from his jacket. "Jason Halbrook, State Attorney General's office. Fraud and Public Trust Division." That got my attention. "We're expanding the investigation," he said. "Your situation opened up a bigger can of worms than anyone expected." I led him to the porch and offered a seat, which he declined. He opened his portfolio and took out a set of documents, real ones, with seals, stamps, and itemized attachments. Preliminary audit shows the Briar Hills HOA collected over $300,000 in unauthorized fines and dues over the last 8 years, he said. About 20% of that came from non-members, people like you. My stomach turned. How many others? 17 confirmed, but we suspect the real number's higher. A few of them are elderly, one's blind. They were sending someone door to door with fake municipal notices, claiming code violations and emergency fees. I leaned against the porch railing. "You're telling me this went on for almost a decade and nobody caught it?" "HOAs usually operate in a legal gray zone," Halbrook said. "They're private entities, and unless someone files a complaint with solid evidence, they're rarely audited. Most people just pay to avoid hassle." "Well," I said, "they messed with the wrong guy this time. That's why I'm here. We need your help with the civil racketeering case." I blinked. "Racketeering?" Halbrook nodded. "They created a fraudulent enterprise to extract money under the false pretense of legal authority. That falls under RICO statutes." I'd seen enough movies to know RICO wasn't just for mobsters anymore. This was serious. Over the next few days, I worked with a state investigator named Leanne. She was sharp, no nonsense, and carried a body cam everywhere she went. She asked for access to the trail cam footage I hadn't already turned in. I handed over everything: time, stamped clips, metadata, the whole archive. One morning, she called me from a restricted number and asked if I could join her at a property off Route 61. When I got there, I saw an old farmhouse that looked abandoned from the outside. But the driveway was freshly graveled, and there were 2 vehicles parked behind a camouflaged fence, both registered to Briar Hills board members. Leanne handed me a pair of binoculars. "Look at the mailbox." I did. It had a small brass plate that read Briar Hills Enforcement Office Rural Division. "They've been running an off-the-books operation," she said. "Fake code enforcement branch. No one filed a business license. No tax ID. But they've been issuing citations from this address for 4 years. I couldn't believe it. So they had a side hustle within an already fake hustle? Worse. They were laundering the fines through a shell landscaping company. That's how they moved the money. By the time the state issued arrest warrants for 3 additional board members, the media had latched onto the story. A local news van showed up at my gate one morning. I told the reporter I wasn't interested in interviews, but he left a card anyway. That night, I got a call from a woman named Trish. She introduced herself as a former Briar Hills resident who'd been on their board briefly before resigning. I didn't know what Valerie was really doing, she said, but I knew something felt off. How'd you get my number? I asked. I saw the story. I know you're the one who started unraveling this. She told me she'd kept a backup of the HOA's meeting minutes from the year she served. I asked why. Because Valerie deleted the official ones from the archives. She did it after a vote she didn't like. What was the vote about? Trish hesitated. Whether to disclose the annexation attempt to the broader community. She said it would complicate revenue projections. I met her the next day in a library parking lot. She handed me a thumb drive, her hands shaking. "You're doing the right thing," she said. The flash drive contained audio recordings, internal financial notes, and scanned emails. One stood out immediately. Valerie had emailed a real estate developer offering to secure access to adjacent properties, using HOA authority in exchange for a payout once the land was flipped. My land. So that was the goal all along. Not dues. Not compliance. They wanted to absorb properties by force, fake the paperwork, then sell to developers at a premium. I sent everything to Leanne. 2 days later, Valerie's bail was revoked, and she was remanded to county jail pending trial. The state filed a civil forfeiture claim against the HOA's assets. Their office, their bank account, even their community pool all seized. The board members' personal accounts were frozen. Developers who'd signed deals with them were subpoenaed. One night, I got a call from Deputy Reyes. She didn't usually call unless something big happened. "They're filing to dissolve the HOA," she said. "Court order." The judge called it an organized fraud ring disguised as a neighborhood association. I didn't say anything for a moment. "You still there?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, just letting that sink in. After that, things changed fast. The residents of Briar Hills held a community-wide vote to replace their board with a neutral oversight committee. The county helped them draft new bylaws that stripped any power to issue fines or enforce codes without verified municipal backing. I got invited to that meeting. I didn't go. Instead, I started putting my attention back into the farmhouse. I rebuilt the porch steps with reclaimed timber, fixed the attic vent that kept attracting raccoons, and finally got the old windmill working again. One afternoon, as I was welding a new latch onto the barn door, a young couple pulled up in a dusty SUV. They introduced themselves as the Tanners, said they just bought the 10-acre parcel next to mine. "We heard what happened here," the woman said. "Wanted to thank you for standing up to them." Most folks would have just paid and kept quiet. I shook their hands. "You won't have to worry about that anymore." They stayed for coffee. We talked about well systems, solar panels, and the best local places to get tractor parts. Real neighbor stuff, no clipboards, no fines, no glitter pens. Just people trying to live honestly on their own land. And that, finally, was the end of it. The first frost of the season hit the morning I received a certified letter with the state seal embossed across the envelope. It wasn't from a court, or the sheriff's office, or any agency I'd dealt with directly. It was from the State Board of Real Property Oversight, a name I hadn't heard before. Inside was a formal notice informing me that I'd been listed as a key witness in a statewide hearing on fraudulent property control schemes. Apparently, the rabbit hole went even deeper than I thought. The letter included a date, location, and a request for all documentation I'd provided so far to be officially submitted into state archives. I packed everything into a banker's box and drove to the Capitol 2 days later. The parking garage under the municipal building reeked of oil and old concrete. As I stepped into the elevator, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the metal door's flannel shirt, worn jeans and boots still dusted with powdered cement. I wasn't dressed for politics. But then again, I wasn't here to impress anyone. The hearing room was all sharp edges and polished wood. Rows of suited officials sat behind a long bench, and a digital clock ticked off the minutes overhead. I recognized Jason Halbrook seated near the center, flanked by 2 legal aides and an assistant typing into a laptop so quickly it sounded like rain on a tin roof. "Mr. Zane," Halbrook greeted me from across the floor. "You're early. Good. We've got something you'll want to hear." He led me to a side room filled with file boxes, each labeled with a different HOA name. Some of them I vaguely recognized from local news headlines. Others were unfamiliar. All of them had red tags attached, marked under investigation. "They weren't working alone," he said, pulling out a folder with my name on the tab. "Briar Hills was part of a coalition. We've traced overlapping board memberships, shared legal templates, and at least 3 shell companies funneling money between them." "Coalition," I echoed, flipping through some of the documents. "They called it the Regional Property Compliance Council," Halbrook said. "Unofficial, completely unregistered. But they used it to trade tactics, draft annexation plans, and coordinate enforcement strategies across over 24 communities." I pointed at a spreadsheet listing internal transfers. "This one shows a wire labeled Zone Conversion Kickback. That a payout?" "Exactly. They'd fabricate environmental or zoning reports to make properties look non-compliant, then use that as leverage to either extract fines or force sales at reduced value. The developer waiting on the other end would buy cheap and flip for triple. And nobody caught this until now. The system was built to avoid scrutiny," he said. "They kept it just under the threshold, small amounts, scattered complaints, nothing centralized. Until your case gave us the thread to pull." I spent the next hour giving sworn testimony before a panel of auditors and legal reps. Halbrook asked about the fake condemnation notices, the trail cam footage, even the red stickers. I answered everything, careful to stick to facts. When I finished, one of the panel members, a woman with silver hair and a voice like granite, leaned forward. "Mr. Zane, did Valerie or her board ever offer to buy your land?" I paused. "Not directly. But I saw emails where she told a developer she could secure it if given time." The woman nodded slowly. "We suspected as much. That's consistent with the other cases. They thanked me and released me by noon." Halbrook walked me back to the lobby. "There's going to be a full audit across every county they operated in," he said. "And the AG is preparing a statewide injunction against all known board members involved. Valerie's facing federal charges now: wire fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering. She'll do time, almost certainly. And restitution's part of the deal." I drove home in silence, the radio off, the box of documents riding shotgun. The interstate blurred into a long gray ribbon under the cold sky. For the first time in months, I felt something close to resolution. Back at the farmhouse, the wind had kicked up. A few leaves scraped across the porch as I unloaded the truck. I stored the documents in the attic, sealed in plastic and labeled, just in case. Then I got back to work. The next few weeks were quiet. A steady routine: repair by day, rest by night, no strange vehicles on the drive. No glitter pen notes, just the sound of field crickets and the occasional hawk circling over the trees. In late November, I received a check in the mail. It came from a court-appointed escrow account, one of several restitution funds set up by the state. It wasn't a fortune, but it was more than I'd expected. Enough to replace the cracked septic tank lid I'd been ignoring and finally run a proper buried conduit to the barn. I didn't cash it immediately. Instead, I walked the property. Every foot of barbed wire, every fence post, every patch of overgrown grass was mine. Not in theory, not just on paper. Mine in the way that mattered. A few days later, I got a call on my landline. It was Leanne. "We're closing the case," she said. "Final charges are filed and most of the fraudulent assets have been seized. The courts ordered dissolution of all the fake enforcement branches. And the coalition, dismantled. every linked account frozen pending civil trials. Valerie pled out to avoid a longer sentence, but she's still looking at over 10 years. I asked her one last question. What happens to the HOAs that weren't involved? They'll be audited. Some will be cleared, others, we'll see, but none of them will operate unchecked again. That door's closed. That night, I lit a fire in the old stone pit behind the house. The Tanners came by with a thermos of cider and a bag of leftover firewood. A few other neighbors wandered over, word having spread about the end of it all. We didn't talk about the HOA, we didn't need to. We talked about the coming winter and the price of feed and whether the local diner would stay open through the holidays. Real things. Human things. As the fire crackled lower and the stars pressed in overhead, I looked around at the people gathered, some in jackets too thin for the cold, others wrapped in wool blankets, all of them standing on land that belonged to them, not to anyone else. And I knew, deep down, that this place had finally shaken off the last of the rot. There would be no more fake fines, no more forged maps, no more neighbors turned into targets for someone else's profit. We'd built something better not with lawsuits or revenge, but with truth, grit, and a refusal to be pushed around. And that was enough.